Alexis, and this is my friend, Tammy.
Hello.
So I will be doing an interview to my friend whose grandma was a Holocaust survivor, and we'll be getting in depth about certain questions. So my first question is, do you remember experiencing anti-Semitism when you were growing up?
So, fortunately for me, I grew up in a very gated Jewish community, so I didn't really experience anti Semitism. The experience I had was more around this level of power between certain nationalities. So, I was in a predominantly Middle Eastern school, and because my father is of European descent, since my grandma is my father's mother, there was this belittling of cultures essentially.
Okay.
But it was actually once I entered the real world, if you want to call it that, where I came to college and there were many different worldviews I've experienced, that I noticed that there is a lot of anti Semitism that's an underlying viewpoint that many college students do carry with
That
themselves.
still happens today.
Yeah.
Okay. After all your family has been through, what is your attitude towards the Arabs?
So I can separate my feelings of, you know, having this stereotypical view of Arabs as a whole, because Arabs doesn't necessarily make you Muslim, it doesn't necessarily make you anti Semitic. It's just there are these factors within certain cultures that sort of create this nuance of seeing Jews as the enemy. And I don't think that everyone carries those values, but coming to John Jay and also being Israeli has changed my perception of the way that other people see me, because my identity is a paradox, and overall, no matter what I do or what I say, my identity sort of dictates for certain people how they see me. So I don't have any negative feelings or emotions or viewpoints about Arabs, because I do have Arab friends. I work with Arabs and I am immersed within Arab culture, since my mother is Middle Eastern, coming from Iran, identifying Persian though. And I am able to separate it because I do come from both worlds. But I can also see as a whole why so many people do have such angry or upset feelings towards the Arab community, because there is this underlying mentality within certain cultures and within certain individuals that I've personally experienced and seen in the media, where we are not accepted, whether it is because we are pro-Zionism or pro-Israel or just pro-Jews as a whole.
Did you ever see if your grandmother had a tattoo on her arm, and did she get it removed, or how did you feel when you saw it?
So when my grandma was telling us about her Holocaust stories, I remember we always asked, oh, where are your numbers? What happened to your numbers? And actually, my grandma did have numbers on her arm, but immediately after the Holocaust ended and everybody was being liberated, there was a certain explosion that occurred. I'm not exactly sure all the details, because my grandma passed away when I was around 8, 9, so many of the stories she told me are a little bit fuzzy in details, but from my understanding, there was an explosion, and some of the materials from the exploded house fell on her arm. So when she had the surgery and was being taken care of medically, her numbers were erased. So she personally didn't have her numbers standing with her at all times, but she did have numbers on her arm at some point.
So you mentioned that your grandmother told you some stories. What are some stories that she told you about the Holocaust, or which one was the worst that you remember hearing, or the worst that you don't like to remember?
So unfortunately, my grandma felt very anxious and nervous every time she told stories. I know that she was part of a documentary that Steven Spielberg once did, and my mom told me how she had to take 4 volumes to get through it. And pretty much one thing I learned through her, and it wasn't necessarily a story about it, but it is in symbolism of what she went through, is that we never throw out food, ever, no matter how little is left over after going to a restaurant or how much of it wasn't finished. It's always saved and eaten later. And I know my grandma was very nervous when it came to bad smells, specifically like burning smells and things like that,
okay.
because it triggered her
Yeah.
from the past. So those were two things that I always witnessed her experiencing, and I still carry that value today. That even if there's, 2 bites left of food, I'm always asking for a doggy bag to take it to go.
Alright. So, how did the Holocaust influence your faith? Can you say whether it strengthened it or weakened it? That's wrong, right?
I mean, it's really interesting because, as someone that has met multiple people who have Holocaust surviving family members, it's always the one end where people become extra religious and they say, you know what, we went through this and we've been through this and now it's important to keep to our Jewish faith. And then for others, it's just like, how could I have gone through all this and still believe in God? And in Judaism, the terms are לחזור בתשובה or ללכת בשאלה, which means either coming back in answer or going back in question. And my grandma's story is a little bit more unique because her family, after everything that happened, were still very religious, and they came from a sector called Satmars, which is also interesting because Satmars don't believe in the state of Israel for the most part, but they were immigrants that came to Israel right after the Holocaust ended. So my grandma's family was relatively religious, but then when my grandpa didn't come back from war, because he died at war at the age of 27, my grandma more or less gave up on religion, but she still held on to the culture. And something so special about Judaism is that as much as it's a religion, it's also a culture. And even though I never really went into that type of thing, I recognize that Judaism, to some degree, is a nationality in a sense. So at the end of the day, the Holocaust sort of shifted people into different directions. But for me personally, it made me realize that no place in the world, like the state of Israel, will accept me for who I am. And even though the civil rights movement has lumped Jews to just being whites, ultimately, my rights will never be 100% pure in a place like America. They can be to the best of its abilities, but no place like the state of Israel will give me full autonomy for being who I am and for following the religion I do. So I think that the Holocaust is just a stronger symbolic representation of how important it is for the Jews to have a Jewish state and for us to be able to be who we want to be and practice religion how we want to practice it because of all the persecution we've experienced throughout history around the world.
So what are your thoughts on the Germans today, and how do you view Germany as of now?
So similar to my ideologies about Arabs and Arabic defining people, I don't have any animosity towards Germany or Germans as a whole. I mean, a lot of sociologists argue that, for the most part, people didn't really identify for or against the cause during the time of the Holocaust. It was just sort of a circumstance that they just um, overlooked. While there is some nuance to that mentality, I don't think the Germans today or the Germans as a whole carry that anger because those in power don't necessarily, align with the values of the past. So again, it's really difficult to sort of place a value on individuals as a whole, and I kind of just see it as person by person. And from my understanding, there are many Israelis that are living in Germany and feel comfortable and have a wonderful quality of life. And it seems to be that Germany is very sorry for what happened, at least on a micro level. I think the salute for Nazis is illegal in Germany, which is a very big step.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you can't really hold people accountable unless it's something that they've done directly. So that's why, to each their own. And as long as you show me the kindness and respect that I'm looking for, it will be reciprocated.
What message would you like to leave with people here on what would you like people to remember about you and your grandma's experiences, and how would people respond to genocide and human rights violation today?
That was a very
Loaded
fully
question.
packed. Yeah, definitely. So for the first half of the question, I think I would want people to just know that, this has been an ongoing issue in history. You could see it in biblical texts, you could see it in secular history, and overall, there are so many different sentiments that show our struggle. So when people say that, anti Semitism is dead, or it's not real, or it's just an extension of Zionism and white supremacy and people going ahead and trying to take over the world, that is a really big misconception. I can be here as an attestament to the fact that we are persecuted as a group of people and we do have our struggles. And, all we really want is just to be able to self govern and be who we want to be. And it's so difficult in this climate. And just, you would think that the worst happened, but the worst is yet to come. And I think, on a progressive level, people are changing and accepting those of different faiths, especially when it's not in this dominating framework of Christianity. So, I just hope that people recognize that, being different isn't a bad thing. It's just different. And, as long as we can respect one another and let people self-govern to the way that they want to live, we can live peacefully. And, to all those that are violating, I think it's more or less lack of education and just lack of understanding of what is important in life. And, we as New Yorkers and as Americans are very lucky and privileged to see the world the way we do. And a lot of people don't have that experience because they don't know any better. Their oppression and their battles are all they know. So it is a gift. And I think the take-home message is that education really is the key to change. So all I could hope is that in all the other places in the world where human rights are constantly being violated, that there is a way to connect with them and sort of enlighten them on the other worlds that exist, in the hopes that, we can change and reform to a stronger and more equal, unified and free world.
Okay, so we're gonna wrap up this interview with one last question. What do you believe we as Americans can do to fight indifference, hatred, racism, anti-Semitism today?
So I think, honestly, being educated, getting involved, getting informed, really engaging in conversation. College is probably the prime base to doing so, and really getting the facts straight. I mean, my experience here, I've learned so much about different injustices in the world. So if people really are to buckle down and try to be educated and do research and engage in conversation, you can go ahead and make a difference.
Well, we would just like to give a big shout out and thank you to Tammy over here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you.